Okay, so we are K Club. We're just a small fraction of the K Club, but May is Mental Health Month, and we wanted to spread awareness of mental health. And so by doing that, we wanted to have a podcast with Dr. Green and Miss Amanda Wade. We'll be asking them questions over mental health and just, yeah. So introduce yourselves.
I am Megan Uni.
I'm Ryan Eastis.
I'm Tess Clarkson.
I'm Hannah Gordon.
Do you want us to introduce us too?
Yeah, if you guys would introduce yourselves.
I'm Amanda Wade. I'm a licensed professional counselor for Pratt Regional Medical Center.
And I'm Mark Green. I'm a psychologist here in Pratt.
Perfect. We can just jump right into the questions.
Sure.
Okay. Hannah, you can ask the first question.
Okay. So the first topic we have is motivation. So how would you guys tell people? Oh, sorry. How do you deal with motivation loss?
Motivation loss just meaning that you've been excited about something and sort of lost that excitement.
And even gearing it towards students more, at the end of the year, almost senioritis, how do you deal with students that are just I'm not motivated anymore. I don't want to do it.
Yeah, I would say one of the big challenges is that it's hard. The younger you are, the harder it is to see that going through really difficult things or things where you feel like you're failing is actually awesome. It's the best thing that can happen to you. And so but the younger you are, the harder it is to recognize that. And so specifically, like you're saying, getting to the end of a school year, it's really common to just feel like this is not what I signed up for, and I'm experiencing some frustration. And it's important to start to see that as those are the key moments. I think one of the cool things at Pratt High in particular is just the emphasis on physical growth. Almost everybody takes a weights class. That doesn't happen everywhere. But because I think that the reason I think that's awesome is because you learn such a powerful metaphor from that. Again, if you're trying to become physically stronger, you are not going to get physically stronger until you've worked so hard that you feel like I'm not able to do anymore and I'm not seeing any change and I'm so frustrated. If you'll push through that, then you see the gains happening. Yeah. And that's true emotionally and psychologically as well. So really seeing the end of a school year kind of like that of I don't even want to do this anymore, but let me push through it.
Yeah. And I use a lot of quotes in therapy because it helps relate and a lot of people know them. So from failing, you learn. From success, not really. And it tags on to what Dr. Green said. It's really about those failures and the losses that make you drive to get harder. And, Pratt High Choir, their motto is adequate, and it's always this level and then reach the next level. Yeah. So it's kind of that same mentality to push that much harder to be just a tad bit better each time.
Yeah. As a psychologist, is it normal to see struggling students, to see kids struggling?
Yeah. It's common, especially with how many activities people are involved in because it's overwhelming for their development.
What would you tell students who say their accomplishments are their worth? And, what would you say to, students that in order to minimize burnout and things like that?
I would definitely come back to this concept of seeing the value that comes from something meaningful to you personally. And so, the question of people that see their accomplishments as their worth, that's tricky to tease apart because there's a level of truth to that, right? There's a level of truth to my worth does come from being willing to grow, being willing to push through those hard things and become a better person. But I have to sort of tease out the nuances of that so that it's not that my accomplishments are my worth, but it's my ability to do something meaningful, which is hard to do without accomplishing something, right? But that's where the true worth comes from.
Yeah. And then with burnout, it's always about just understanding your own limits and being able to prioritize your schedule to maximize what you can give to something before you hit that level of, I'm done.
Oh, which one are we in?
Academic pressure.
How does academic and athletic pressure affect students like us?
You'll hear the term stress a lot, right? And stress is an interesting concept because I would equate the definition of stress as very similar to the definition of pressure. Stress means resistance, right? Stress means pressure. And so that there's this important element of let me find out how to face pressure and face stress, but I also need to know when is it too much. If you think, again, I'll keep going back to physical metaphors because I think it's really relatable. If you think of a spotter when you're trying to lift a weight, right? Like that spotter is really important because if I've done everything I can and I can't do anymore, I need a spotter. That's not the same as saying, well, I can't lift this, someone else better lift it, right? Those are two really different things. No, I have to do this. I have to figure out how to push through that resistance. And so pressure and stress, it's a matter of I'm going to do everything I can. Sometimes I'm going to need some help. And I have to learn to be self-aware enough to know when is it okay to ask for help. And I bet we'll get into that topic sometime tonight too.
Sure.
Yeah. I don't have anything to add to that. He hit me up.
Okay.
So, why do teenagers moods alter so frequently, and how can we better understand that and use it to help us?
Well, you all have hormones that are raging at this age, so that doesn't help moods because you don't understand internally what's going on in your systems. And so understanding that there are times that it might feel like you are out of control, it may not be because of outside things. It might just be because of your body. And so all of that interplays and it can create this good tension inside of you that creates that pressure, the stress, once again, internally to be like, okay, I don't feel good, so I'm going to lash out at people. And even though you're trying not to, it's just going to come out sometimes. So hormones are a huge thing. And then depending on how active you are, your neurotransmitters as well that are responsible for mood can be impacted, whether it's outside in the sun and movement, or if you're slumped away in a dark room, it's going to also play that role as well.
Would social media affect this? Or do you see that with teens, like our moods and how we perceive things?
That's a tricky one to tease out too. I would say social media amplifies it, right? It's not new. From the beginning of humans, right? Those teenage years are this massive transition. When you're a little kid, adults are this different species, right? They're grown-ups, and I don't try to relate to grown-ups. I just see them as those are grown-ups. I'm not one of them. As soon as you're a teenager, you start saying, oh, wait, I am going to be a grown-up, right? And so you're in this transition time. And so that's not new, right? Like social media isn't bringing something new to the table, but it is amplifying it and increasing access to it to where it's in your face a little bit more.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What advice would you give to students wanting to become more connected with their parents or feeling a separation between them and their parents, just being distant and whatnot?
How do you get your parents to understand?
Well, first of all, your parents actually do understand. You just don't want to believe that they understand because your parents were teenagers. And even though certain things in the world have changed and you guys have social media that I didn't grow up with until college or my parents didn't have at all, they still went through the same stuff.
Yeah.
So I think the one thing for teenagers to remember before trying to just be like, you don't understand, they do. Now, you guys may not be able to communicate it well together. So I think it's learning how to communicate with your parents and not just going off on them because they don't understand, but actually listening to them as well as letting them listen to you.
Yeah, knowing that parents, again, they understand what it's like what it was like to be a teenager. They understand that. They don't know how to raise a teenager until they've done it, right? And so it's that patience combined with, let me give them a little bit more credit, like Amanda is saying, but also let me be a little bit patient. I would say the biggest thing to just set as a baseline is let's agree that we have the same goal. My goal is to be a happy, healthy adult. My parents' goal is for me to be a happy, healthy adult. Yeah. We have the same goal. We have really different perspectives on how to get there, and that's where a lot of the conflict comes from. But if we can just understand we have the same goal, then there's sort of a bridge to build.
How would you navigate movie high school to normal high school? Like, especially with social media, you see all these people, like, romanticizing high school, I guess, and it's not necessarily the same. How would you navigate that?
Well, the truth about any sort of media portrayal is let's exaggerate the stuff that makes for good viewing, right? Drama is interesting,
Yeah.
and normal everyday life is not that interesting, right? And so any media portrayal is going to really exaggerate the things that are more fun, more interesting, more dramatic, funnier. And so I would say they're always going to grab an element of truth, otherwise we wouldn't relate to it. But knowing, well, they've exaggerated it. And so whether those are healthy things, they've exaggerated, hero stories to where it's almost superhuman, but even exaggerating things that are negative, right? Exaggerating sexuality, exaggerating the cruelty that exists. Again, you guys see those things, right? But now let's exaggerate it for good viewing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what is depression and anxiety, and how can we navigate that, like, in our normal day-to-day? And is it just okay to have those things and stuff like that?
Well, it is okay to have problems. Everybody has them. It's just what level you allow those problems to sink in and sit in you before you realize that something's wrong. And so with depression, it's a mood disorder. That's what we classify it as. And so it deals with a depressed mood. So sadness, worthlessness, hopelessness, sadness, extreme sadness at times, and helpless. And a lot of that just sinks, and it just feels like you're in a deep pit and there's no way to climb out of it without help. And anxiety is really another term for stress. It's just, when we look at it as a disorder, it's extreme, unrealistic, exaggerated to where it's specific to a fear of something, going out in public, speaking in public places, or it's just generalized that every little thing makes you worry, and it becomes unrealistic to the extreme. And so those two things are common, especially in teenagers. That's what I see predominantly. I don't know what you see, but teenagers, that's predominantly what we're going to see. But it's okay to have those problems. It's just not okay to let it sit without you trying to fix that. And so sometimes it's you asking for help and seeking it, having support systems, but recognizing that there's something wrong is really the key as to knowing, okay, something's not right with me and it's off. So what can I do right now to help myself? But what am I going to need potentially outside of myself? Parents, they're great support systems for the most part if you talk to them. Seeking professional help is a big step. That's why our professions exist. But it is a common thing, and it's okay to know that something's wrong, but don't let it become your identity either, just like your academics and your athletics. Don't become, well, I am depression. No, I am depressed. It's different, just like medical diagnosis is. We don't sit there and say, I am a migraine. No, I have a migraine.
Yeah.
It's kind of that same mentality, but flipping it for mental health, that it's just an illness, but it can be managed just like other illnesses.
Yeah.
I think one of the really important things to understand about emotions is that they are an important biological feedback process. That's what an emotion is. My body is trying to give me feedback, a lot like physical pain. If my knee is hurting, that's my body trying to get my attention and say, hey, something needs your attention. That's what an emotion is. If I'm depressed, if I'm anxious, it's my body saying, hey, something needs your attention. And so if I can distinguish my emotions and my thoughts, every emotion is valid because it's just biological feedback. There's no such thing as you shouldn't be feeling that way. Again, that's like saying your knee really shouldn't hurt. Well, it does, right? It's weird to tell me that it should, or it just does, or it doesn't. And so emotions are the same way. There's no such thing as I shouldn't feel that. But if I distinguish that from thoughts, like what Amanda was saying, I can validate the emotion. It's okay to feel this. It's even, I would use the term important. It's important to feel this. The thoughts are where now I want to intervene. But I don't want to use logic to try to intervene with an emotion any more than I want to try to use an emotion to intervene with logic. I want to distinguish those two things, address logic with logic, address emotion with emotion, and then those two processes can become teammates within me. My emotions are giving the logical side of me valuable feedback, but the logical side of me is taking healthy approaches to deal with those emotions.
Kind of on the same note, but a little bit different. What would you say the difference is between an anxiety attack, a panic attack, or just being stressed out? Like when you know that it's a problem versus just being a normal high schooler?
They're all pretty similar, so it is hard to distinguish them.
Yeah.
Anxiety is going to look very different from a panic attack in terms of what's the focus that's causing it. But attack wise, it's going to be individualized because we're all different. So some people will have physiological symptoms. You'll start sweating, your heart will start racing, your pupils will dilate, your breathing will get shallow. But other people, it could just be an intense attack psychologically. Racing thoughts, intrusive thoughts, nightmares even could cause an attack like that.
Yeah.
So it kind of just, we have to look at our DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, to really distinguish it, because there are those defining features that we look for. But in terms of those two versus just being stressed out, everybody experiences stress. It's just the amount of attention we take as to, is it a threat or is it a challenge that we can overcome? If it's a threat, it can turn into that more extreme sense of anxiety where it just becomes that heart-wrenching, like, I can't overcome this. Yeah. But if you view it as a challenge, it's, I can overcome this. What are the steps I need to take? And you're able to assess what resources you have personally or outside of you that can help you overcome those stressors.
Yeah, I would add on that what you're dealing with is your body's sympathetic nervous system.
Yeah.
And so people call that fight or flight, flight or freeze, right? You hear different terms for that. But that, again, it's my body's biological system that perceives a threat and is trying to respond in a protective way. That's what that whole system is.
Building off of what we've been talking about, what would you say to a student who's afraid to reach out to help or is experiencing these symptoms or having anxiety attacks or panic attacks that's just afraid to take the next step to reach out for help?
Well, I think it would depend on what they're afraid of, right? I think whether they're afraid of being judged, whether they're afraid, I think a lot of people are just afraid that it's not going to be worth the risk, right? Talking to somebody's not going to change any of this, right? I think that's a really common sentiment, is it's not going to change any of my problems to talk to somebody about it. But again, it's a matter of, well, what are you afraid of? And it's being willing to just validate those fears, but then say, let's talk about why it might be worth it.
And I think finding that one person you trust to talk to first is a good step, whether it's, a best friend or a teacher even, or a parent, if you're comfortable with that. I think it's finding the one person that you can kind of start to open up about it, and then you can talk through it with somebody instead of it just running in your own head constantly.
Is it bad to use terms like bipolar and anxiety frequently or more commonly?
I don't think it's bad to use the terms. I think they get used very incorrectly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
bipolar to most people means, oh, well, I'm happy one minute and sad the next, right? And that's not what the term bipolar means. Again, like Amanda was saying, these are diagnoses, and they have pretty strict parameters on how those get diagnosed. So I'd say the only downside to using those terms is when we're using them incorrectly, it can really invalidate people that are experiencing them.
Yeah.
And it's okay to a certain level to self-diagnose. Like, Dr. Green was saying, it's good to validate what you are feeling. And knowing some of the terms is good because you have a stepping point to maybe reach out to somebody and ask more specific questions. But when it becomes the only way of figuring out what's wrong, and you just have said, oh, I am this way. So, yep, I did Dr. Google. Here's what I have. So I am depressed. So I have depression. And you really don't meet the criteria to actually be diagnosed with it.
Yeah.
So it's understanding those nuances of those terms and what they actually mean.
Yeah. So when we were feeling like things like that, what are some different ways that we can cope with it and get through it?
I always start with the very, very simplest things. Are you drinking water, right? Are you getting some level of getting outside and just being in nature? Are you spending time with people that you care about? Are you getting sleep at night, right? Like, I think let's start with the very basics, because those things make a huge difference.
How much caffeine are you drinking? Like, teenagers drink a lot of it, and especially energy drinks that are common for everybody who's constantly going. That impacts a lot of people, and they don't even realize it. So those basics are a good... I agree with him 100% on that.
Mark, you mentioned sleep. Does sleep actually affect our life? And does lack of sleep actually affect our mental mindset? Is some questions that students have.
Yeah, hugely.
Yes.
Hugely. There's a lot of different opinions in terms of how much sleep, right? Like, you'll hear your whole life, you hear 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours of sleep. There is some variance in different human beings, right? Just like there's variance in anything else. So not everybody necessarily needs 8 hours of sleep, but you need somewhere in that range.
Yes.
And the reason it's so important is just because there is a neurological process that goes on while we sleep that if it isn't happening, you're messing with your neurochemistry, and neurochemistry combined with I'm in a period of life where my hormones are in flux, it just makes everything a lot more complicated. So sleep is huge.
Yeah.
So on the subject of sleep, would you consider sleep an outlet, or like if you're struggling with something and your one outlet is just going to sleep, is that healthy or is that an unhealthy outlet?
It kind of depends on the person, but ultimately if sleep is going to help for a little bit, that's okay to use it, but not overuse it. And at that point, if that's all you're doing, that's where your mind needs to be tripping that something's really not right if this is all I'm wanting to do. But yeah, it does recreate some of those changes that are happening during the day. Physically, we have to recover. Sleep helps our bodies recover. Psychologically, our minds have to recover, even though people don't think that's necessary. But if it becomes the only outlet, it's really not actually helping anything because you're not processing anything. You're not attending to what is really the cause of what's making you want to sleep. Because it's more than just, well, my body's telling me to sleep, so I'm sleeping. No, what's really underneath that?
Yeah, it's important. I have to cope with emotions, right? Again, they're an important biological feedback system, so I have to cope with them. There are a whole list of unhealthy ways to cope with emotions. There's a whole list of healthy ways to cope with emotions. But regardless of whether I'm doing a healthy or an unhealthy coping thing, I have to actually be dealing with what's going on. So, something healthy like, go for a walk. But if going for a walk means I'm never going to actually address this, I'm trying to hide from it, I'm trying to escape from it. So sleep can be the same thing. If it's just escaping, then it's not really ever going to make things better.
And usually in sleep means we're dreaming, which means we're sometimes tending to what we're trying to avoid, which only makes us want to sleep more to avoid it, but then we're just recreating that circle.
How would you encourage kids to cope healthily and look for healthy outlets? What would those be?
Well, again, I'll go back to that same list. I'll
say of water. And
it's so important to find the people that are dedicated to becoming healthier, right? And I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Because we're all really imperfect at it, right? You're not going to find somebody who's just some media portrayal of here's the healthy friend, right? Everybody's flawed. Everybody is going to do things that disappoint you or that hurt you. And so if we're trying to find that perfect, trustworthy best friend, we're going to be pretty disappointed. But if I can just find people that are dedicated to becoming healthier, when they do make mistakes, can they acknowledge those mistakes and apologize and try to find ways to get better? And so when I talk about healthy social interactions, that's the way I would define healthy, is find people that are dedicated to getting better.
Yeah, and then coping wise too, it's finding what you enjoy doing that gives you a little bit of a breather to just feel like yourself for a little bit again, because those little reminders will kind of help elevate mood as well, because we tend to forget to do the things we enjoy doing when we get stressed or anxious or depressed or XYZ.
Yeah.
And those kind of go to the wayside. So if you can bring them in, even in small spurts, sometimes I'm like, just do 5 minutes of it. Just 5 minutes of it. And sometimes that'll help recreate that routine and that structure and the joy again that they're missing a little bit of.
One thing high school isn't great at is pacing, right? And pacing is actually important. So in high school, again, it's go, 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 go. And you have kids that are getting up at 5 in the morning and just completely booked solid until 10 o'clock at night. And then that's not even counting homework, right? And so high school's not great at pacing. And so it becomes important to learn how to pace yourself. And like Amanda says, you have to take breaks. You have to give yourself decompression time.
So what's the difference between being mentally tough and needing mental help?
The difference between those two, I would say getting help is a sign of mental toughness, right? And so needing mental help, I think we all need mental help on one level or another, right? We're talking about diagnostic thresholds, right? Whether you can be diagnosed with something, but everybody needs mental help. And so knowing that I can't do everything by myself, I can't be this person who just is completely self-sufficient. I need other people.
Yeah, I can't add anything because that sums it up.
What would you say to a teenager who's afraid to reach out and get help? How would you help them get the help that they need.
Well, I'd come back to the pacing idea. Go back to a weightlifting metaphor one more time, right? If I'm telling somebody who can maybe lift 20 pounds, you really need to lift this 100-pound thing, all that's going to do is make them feel like a failure and feel inadequate. And so if I have somebody and I'm saying, you need to go talk to a mental health professional, but they can't. It's too scary. They don't know where to start. It's too overwhelming. It's too intimidating. Again, it's like telling that person, you just have to lift that 100 pounds. Well, if I'm going to keep trying to lift that 100 pounds when I literally can't lift it, again, I'm going to get overwhelmed. I'm going to feel frustrated. I'm going to give up because I'm wasting my time. I might even injure myself, right? Hurt myself worse. And so if I can't go in and make an appointment with a mental health professional, that's okay. That would be the lifting 100 pounds. I would say, find out what lifting 25 pounds would be. Does that mean that you're just talking to a good friend? Does that mean maybe you open up to your parents about some things? Maybe there's a teacher that you trust, a coach that you trust, a pastor that you trust, right? Like, find that thing that is achievable. So I can't just say, well, I can only lift 20 pounds. That's all I can do. I say, what am I capable of doing that's going to push me a little bit farther? And so to that person, I would say, figure out what's one step further than you think you can take, but don't try to jump 10 steps.
Yeah. And then as if a friend comes to you asking for help, they're struggling, I think a big thing is just listening, just being a listener. Don't try to fix it for them, because oftentimes people just need to talk it out a little bit, and then they'll ask for, what should I do? So listening is a crucial part to get that little step maybe for them to get going next would also be. And even offering to go with them to talk to somebody else is a great thing for other people to come alongside somebody who is struggling too. Because sometimes when we have that little bit of support, not just to talk to individually, but go with somebody to say, okay, I'm here just as a support system. It helps them kind of go, okay, I can do this because I have somebody right here with me. And then they can start taking that next step on their own too at some point when they're comfortable. But it's a comfort level too of getting out of that zone of, I don't need to do this more than 20 pounds. Like, this is where I'm stuck.
Yeah. Another general question is that as we're teenagers, we don't really know ourselves a whole lot. We're still trying to figure things out. So how do we know what we need whenever we're sad? Like, how do we know, like, how to help ourselves almost whenever we're just trying to figure it all out in general?
I think one of the coolest things you can think of is just think of life as an experiment, right?
Yeah.
This is practice. It's not a performance. And so let me try something. If I want to try doing, some new activity, I want to learn how to play the guitar, right? Let me try that. And maybe that really helps. Maybe it doesn't, right? But that's okay. That's not a failure. Again, this is a practice. It's an experiment. Let me try something, see what happens, and then adjust.
I like that.
Yeah, and oftentimes in therapy, that's what we're doing with people. We're just suggesting new things that they haven't tried or recreating something they have tried to try a new way of it. And then it's come back and tell me how it worked. It's kind of trial and error just in the regular world.
Okay.
Speaking as students, how would you differentiate the social normals between what's normal for students and what's not normal for students, and just making a boundary of finding what's good for you, and even though it might not be what's the normal, what would you say to
in what context?
that?
Normal in what context?
I would just say in school, if you're constantly comparing yourself to your friends and that becomes your normal, what would you say to eliminate that?
Well, the easy answer is don't compare yourself to anybody else, because we're all unique and individual. But it's not that easy as teenagers, because we're constantly thrown into a world of compare yourself. Try to be the next best. Be the top athlete, be the top student, be the top singer, be the top instrumentalist, whatever it might be. But looking at comparison as not a negative, trying to flip it to a positive for yourself. Like, what are they doing that maybe I could add on to what I'm doing for myself? Would be maybe that little twist to get it to not be so judgmental of yourself. But also just going back to, you guys are teenagers. You don't have to have it all figured out. And it's okay to not be like everybody else. Where's your personal values and morals and guidance coming from internally that is helping you choose what's right and wrong for you? And going along with, okay, what are the rules in the school? What are the rules in society that we have to abide by? And how can I make sure that that's still a norm for me that's accepted, but not letting the outside influences of, well, don't do that. It's not cool. It's not the popular thing to do. Popularity only lasts for so long. Once you get out of high school, it really doesn't matter. And so if you can start adapting that mentality of, I don't have to be the cool kid. I can just be Hannah, Tess, Ryan, Megan. And that's good.
For sure.
And I think developing your own internal compass on those sorts of things, right? So that I'm not trying to be somebody else. I'm trying to be a better version of me.
Yeah.
Because again, one of the things that is really common is I set up these all or nothing kind of dichotomies that really set me up for failure. And so again, if it's, well, don't compare yourself to anybody else, where that gets taken to an unhealthy place is live your own truth, right? Be exactly who you are, and you don't have to listen to anybody else. That can go to a really unhealthy place, but not if I'm focused, again, on this internal compass. Am I becoming happier? Am I becoming a better version of me? And if I'm not, well, then I need to be willing to stretch myself. But it's that I don't want to be someone else. I want to be a better version of me.
Yeah.
Looking at other people can be okay to get ideas, right?
Yeah.
Man, that person is so kind. I think maybe I could be a kinder person, or that person, again, maybe has this cool talent. I wonder if I would be good at that. So it's okay to look at other people for ideas, but then to come back to, I'm not trying to be them.
Yeah.
I want to be a better version of me.
Inspiration.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Is there anything you want students or the community to know?
Like, what's your overall advice
Yes,
for
yeah.
the student body and just the community in general?
I'll give you a few little tidbits. One thing I would say is the level of divisiveness that is present because of instant access to information is going to continue to get worse. And so there's this idea of us versus them, and let's try to really tear down the them and build the us up. Again, that is not remotely new, right? That has been happening since human beings came to be.
Yeah.
But what is new about it is how intense it gets. And again, the instant access to information makes that divisiveness worse. So look for ways to unite rather than divide. Any chance you can get to do that, because it will lead to greater mental health. Connection and supporting and caring about other people does really important things for our mental health.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's also important to remember that it's okay to feel. We like to shove emotions aside, and we talked about it earlier too, but I think it's okay to feel. And it's okay to feel bad, and it's okay to feel angry, and it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to cry. Those are all healthy things. So it's okay to feel those things and then learn from what's driving it, and just be able to communicate it as well to yourself more than anybody else.
Yeah.
I think that wraps up all of the questions that we have and that students at PHS have about mental health. And
Thank you guys for joining us.
yes, we
thank
really
you.
appreciate you
Appreciate it.
taking time out of
We're
your day.
hoping to spread awareness over mental health. There's multiple activities we're doing throughout the month, and this was just the kickstart of that. So
Yeah, we appreciate you.
Not a problem.
Thanks for having
Thank you.
us.
Thank you.